Let's do it.
Sovtoshi, am I pronouncing the handle
Yeah,
correctly?
so yeah, the name kind of comes from the project I'm creating, Sovereign Craft. So it's a bit of a play on words there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for doing this. You are the first in my experiment of, I guess, opening myself up to being self-booked on the podcast, and you were the first one to come in and book some time in the Calendly thing. So I'm looking forward to this. I appreciate you taking the leap.
Yeah, it's fun, and I have a confession to make. It's actually one of my Twitter followers that suggested I join this podcast. I had never watched your podcast,
How dare you?
I know it. But then he's like, "Hey, you should join this guy's podcast." And I watched a video or two, and I was like, "Yeah, that makes a lot of sense." And he sent me the link, and away we go. So, I mean, that's how we meet each other. So
yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, tell me what's on your mind. Tell me why you wanted to come
yeah,
talk to a
so
complete stranger.
yeah, I mean, just a bit of the preamble, I guess, of how I got to where I am. Um, like so many, I kind of had a bit of a panic when the COVID started. Not due to the COVID itself, but due to some of the things that were happening in the world. And
Mhm.
for me, my profession is as a systems administrator, and I kind of said before, you realize that you're a senior systems administrator when the administration of said systems becomes not just technology. And I was at a place where I was like, okay, the government is giving out money and people aren't working. So that doesn't work. you can't give out money with no one. And I didn't understand the economy at all at the time, but it was enough for me to realize that within that system, something is broken. So from there, I mean, I didn't even know how to buy a stock. I didn't know how to do anything. So I started off with some conviction in some companies that I knew about. But I kind of stumbled upon Bitcoin because obviously there was an expansion of the total pool of money that was happening, and Bitcoin seemed to be the solution to that. And I went through the shitcoinery phase, like so many, lost a lot of money there, but made my way to understanding that really Bitcoin is the way of everything.
Yeah.
So I think a major problem that people have, especially those involved in technology, which there tends to be a correlation, is that we compare the technology of the different, let's say, cryptocurrencies, as opposed to the monetary properties of said currencies. And that's really where the differentiation comes in. So I'm a busy father of 5. So
Wow.
I'm not wealthy. So with all of this expansion of the monetary base causing inflation, something's got to give, right?
Right.
My kids were into Minecraft a little bit, which is why I'm this Minecraft character on your screen. And I'm not particularly a gamer, but I did have a little bit of experience in the Minecraft world, and I got them into it. I figured it was a very good educational platform for those people who have not played Minecraft. And there does appear to be very little overlap between Minecraft players and Bitcoin people. But for those who have not played Minecraft, it's very much like digital Lego with some properties that allow you to do some things that are a bit more physics related. You can get right into making a full-blown calculator. You can go on YouTube and see people who made circuits that will equate to a calculator or even a processor inside the game just through relays and as what they call redstone.
Cool.
So it's quite a scalable game, but ultimately it's a combination of Lego and maybe one of those little electronic lab kits where you hook up some wires. And some people are into architecture, some people are into various different things, and it's just a sandbox game where you can build. So how did one become the other? Well,
wait. Before
yeah.
you get into that, I want to ask, because you covered a lot of ground there, and I'm curious. And it's been interesting to me to hear about people that kind of got their first exposure or inkling to monetary policy, inflation, central banking, Bitcoin in 2020, because, you know, we're only 2 years on basically. And that's a lot of ground to cover and a lot of insights to have and a lot of education to
Yes.
digest, I guess. What was your first exposure to Bitcoin, or was it crypto first and then you came upon Bitcoin
Um,
later?
well, one of my buddies, and I kind of curse him a little bit for not telling me more, I guess. But when I first got into investing, again, I was in the technology scene, and one of my buddies was like, "So you're gonna buy Bitcoin?" And I was like, "No, I'm not buying that junk." You know, like it was kind of a, uh, like everyone else, I didn't know, and I thought it was some kind of a ridiculous Ponzi. My wife actually tells me that sometime back in 2015, 16, that I had mentioned something about Bitcoin and that I should look into it. And my gosh, I wish I would have, because I'd be in a very different place today. But no, like I kind of heard about Bitcoin first, but then of course research led me into all the other ones. And I started off looking at Ethereum and thinking the same thing as so many other people, where they would say, "Oh, it's proof of stake, not proof of work, so it's more efficient." And then I was kind of in the time of Chia, which came and went, which was, "Oh, we're not going to use compute, we're going to use storage, and it's going to be called farming, not mining, and your storage is your plot," and all these ridiculous ideas, which were fascinating from, again, a technology perspective. And I was a technologist first. So I got distracted by a lot of these things, because not realizing that a new unit of account had a very important property, which is expense. And if there's a way around that expense, then it is not a viable form of monetary creation.
Mhm.
So, the actual expense of Bitcoin is a wonderful property, in that, Sailor would probably say thermodynamically sound. but ultimately, the the cost of creating each new unit in Bitcoin, due to its algorithm, is perfectly tuned to its value. And it's never more and never less. And as people become more creative and innovative, it lends itself towards um, more efficient forms of energy production or creation, and that's just built into the algo. So over time, I got there, but as you said, I was new to it and I didn't understand money. So my journey there, I actually have a pinned tweet on my alt, which I sometimes quote. But yeah, like there's a sequence of videos that I recommend to people. A couple of them are by Cold Fusion um, on YouTube, and he just talks about what money is. And then from there, there's an excellent video by Jeff Booth that I normally recommend to people. And then one from Michael Saylor, where he was talking with Tucker Carlson. And then from there, I just tell people to read the Bitcoin Standard.
Right.
And there's a bit of a journey from there. My journey that got me out of my last alts, or poo coins, or whatever people want to call them. The ones that got me out of the last ones, which were most similar to Bitcoin, or privacy tokens such as
Right.
Monero. But the thing that got me out of the last ones, which was Litecoin, and possibly a bit of Doge, um, was actually finding out about Lightning. Um, watching Jack Mallers on Bitcoin, I think it was 2021, the one after the one that he cried.
22.
22.
22.
Okay, so it was 22. Um, yeah. Anyway, when the one that he was talking about, his stuff in El Salvador, and he actually does a transaction in store on Lightning via Tor. It just made me realize that regardless of any other chain, the blockchain is necessarily um, inefficient. So it doesn't matter what the currency, let's say, is, the blockchain will be too slow for global adoption. And I
Mm.
think the only reason why our minds accept the idea of multiple different units of account is because trust was needed with gold. It was not scalable via space. it was hard to verify physically. It still is hard to verify physically, depending upon the size. There's different methods, and you can hide tungsten in it and all kinds of things. So, you know, like Bitcoin removes that need because you can programmatically verify the digital currency, which is
Hmm.
great. So
And
you know, with
also
Lightning, it
with
fixes that.
because yeah, I totally agree. And the ridiculous sort of claim to Litecoin was that it was silver to Bitcoin's gold, but in the physical world, gold, due to its value to weight ratio, just couldn't be divided sufficiently to account for the smaller value transactions. So it needed a secondary. You needed a secondary monetary metal, basically, that had a lower value to weight ratio that could accommodate those
Yeah,
transactions. But obviously,
absolutely.
Bitcoin being as divisible as it is, you don't need another thing for it to accommodate those transactions. So
Well,
there's
and off
many.
chain, it's even more divisible. You know, very few people
Well,
know
yeah,
that on
exactly.
the Lightning Network, it's millisats.
Hmm.
So you can go even smaller once you're at higher levels. So absolutely, like the it was actually the limitations of the physical properties of money before we had a digital money that caused us to require different currency denominations. So
Hmm.
we should not accept a different unit of account if we don't need a different unit of account, because it introduces volatility to those units. If someone is in gold and they are a large holder of gold, and all of a sudden they need to do a whole bunch of small transactions and they buy silver, that pushes down the value of gold. It actually affects the unit of account by diluting it into another unit of account. And all of these coins will delay the adoption of Bitcoin. So,
So
you know,
when was that? When was the moment where your last shit coins were converted into the one true coin?
well, I still have a freaking antenna on top of my house, just because I can't sell my helium miner, so I don't know if that counts. But hey, I make a
I
dollar
don't
a
know
day
what
off that
I don't know what that
antenna.
means.
Oh my god. Well, I did a lot of shitcoinery. So basically I make $1 a day on a shitcoin because there's an antenna on top of my house. But
Awesome.
anyways, I mean it all goes into Bitcoin now. I would say my last time of actually holding them for any period of time was probably somewhere early-ish 2022. Um, let's say somewhere around February is when I really was like, no, no, like it really is just money. All we
What's it
need is money.
what's it been like? Yeah, and what's it been like since having that realization? Because as you are probably begin to appreciate, once you once that light bulb moment happens, a lot of other stuff starts to happen too, in terms of your, how you assess things and your perception of things, and how many things you see this upgraded form of money rectifying or being related to in some capacity. So what's from February to now, what's your intellectual journey been like?
Well, you know, I think that was almost in some ways the end, because I had already, as I call it, unlocked the denominator before then. So, you know, I was doing some charting of different companies and different assets, and I wasn't using dollars as a denominator. I'd use the NASDAQ as the denominator. I'd
Hmm.
use, you know, Bitcoin as the denominator. I would divide things out in TradingView to see how the graphs change as the denominator changes. So by the time I was like, when I was down to, let's say, Bitcoin and Litecoin, like before I really ran my own Lightning node, and that was earlier this year, I would actually say it's the running of my Lightning node that put the nail in the coffin, because there's a tweet again on my alt, and maybe I should start bringing some of these tweets over to this YouTube handle, which is Sovtoshi, because I do want to kind of separate myself out and be a bit more focused on Twitter. But there's another one that I put together, which was a tweet about traditional finance and how those terms interrelate. For instance, Bitcoin is relatively equal to gold. Lightning node is relatively equal to a bank. A Lightning channel is relatively equal to an interbank uh, relationship, where one bank can transact with another bank. And we can keep going. A loop out which is kind of sending out Bitcoin to your banking partner to have a liquidity channel. Well, that's what that's like. And then from there, you can take it one step further and say, what's a rebalance? Well, a rebalance is when you have relationships with multiple banks, also known as lightning nodes. And when you rebalance all those, people just kind of settle their accounts between one another. So really, the Lightning Network is structured very much like a banking system, which makes sense. It should be. The big difference is that anyone can be their own bank right now because there's no regulations yet, and I do believe there will be regulations eventually on Lightning nodes, and I think that that will probably be a somewhat healthy thing.
Why?
But in a well, okay, so now we're really going to go into the Lightning rabbit hole, I guess. But the more I compare Lightning to a banking system, and the fact that everyone can be their own bank. For some people, for many people in the world that don't have much savings, and I do think that will change over time. But when people are transacting, not everyone is going to want to run a Lightning node. Lightning nodes, because of their nature, will always require channels, and
Yeah.
channels are interbank relationships. And that seems arduous for the average person who's not business minded. So I do see people having custodial Lightning nodes. The problem with those today is they are unregulated, and you can only trust them as far as you can throw them to an extent. So the way I see it over time is there will be policies that will happen where insurance companies will be able to look at how these Lightning node operators are handling their funds and offer insurance based on if their method of securing their node is adequate. And I think that that will be good for consumers. So, one day you will have, let's say, Wall of Satoshi be able to say, we are insured by this other third party organization that will insure you up to $1,000. It won't be dollars, but we'll just say dollars, X amount of Satoshis is insured by this third party company based on their audit of our internal policies.
But is
And
that
I think that's a good
regulation,
thing.
or is that just an
Ah,
insurance provider offering,
yeah. And yes, I mean, I think there will be some regulation that comes with it, because governments ultimately want their cut too for taxation, and I think you will always need very small amounts, but I think you always will need a certain amount of taxation. People still need roads. There's a few other things that might come into play that might be easier to be centralized. I'm not a complete anarchist, and I think with some of that there will be some regulation. Like if you're paying taxes to the government will likely require you to, let's say, pay from certain Lightning providers that are um, in some form recognized by the government,
I think
or different
they'll
things. I don't know.
attempt that for sure, but I think the possibilities that Bitcoin ultimately allows for means that over time, and of course, this isn't going to happen immediately because most people aren't going to value the capacity or the ability to transact, outside of the prying eyes of government, let's say. But I do think over time people will gravitate towards that option because you give an inch to the government and they take a mile, and I think that's always going to be the case. And over time, I think transacting outside of their realm is going to effectively limit their capacity to fund themselves, and it'll shrink over time down to whatever form, if any, is valued by the market. But I don't so again, I mean, the recent proposal, I think, by Elizabeth Warren is basically something akin to that, trying to regulate these things. But I don't think.
But they don't understand it enough
Yeah,
to
of
have the
course.
regulations anywhere near where they will be in the future.
Of course, but I don't think the market will demand regulation. I think those things can be handled by reputation and competition and those sorts of things. I think if there's regulation, it'll be totally because the government wants to try to control this thing, not the market demanding it for confidence or trust or anything like that issues. So we shall see,
Yeah.
obviously, but that's my take on that.
Yeah, and what the future holds exactly is a little bit unknown. And
Sure, of
I
course.
think that we can all have our
Totally unknown.
speculation. Like for a while I was saying the only three forms of taxes, two forms of taxes that I considered legitimate was number one, um a estate tax. And the reason is because I don't believe capital should go to people that don't necessarily deserve it. So I see a purpose in
Well,
estate tax
what
to,
a what tax? Estate, like ESTATE?
yeah. So like when someone dies, I don't
Yeah.
think, you end up with a whole bunch of spoiled brats. If someone is extremely effective in their capital acquirement, then you end up with people who are useless because they, sure, give
Well,
money while you're alive. But I think if someone dies with money, the ability to pass things on, I think that's a good way. That if we do need to get a little bit of tax out of people, I think that an estate tax would make sense. Only because if they need to gain money somehow, then that is essentially money that any person who is alive has not earned themselves. So I
yeah,
could see an estate
but
tax being sensible.
who should decide whether it's sensible or not? Like, if the person
Well, by the people, and
yeah, but the person who died is the one who owns the capital. If they deem it should go to a charity or a descendant or a, son or daughter, then
and
they're
you
presumably
might have,
the most reasonable, like that they have the greatest claim to determine what should happen to it. No?
yeah, and you'll still have charities, you'll still have all these things, but I do think that there there'll be some form of centralization. I believe. I don't know how much it will be. I don't think it'll be much. It really won't be much.
But here's the other
But
point.
that
Like, if people disagree, to the extent that people disagree, and I think most people would, because I don't think they'd be comfortable having someone else, having your accrued capital just because you died, the state takes it over, has a claim on it, even a partial one. But I think that's, again, going back to the things that Bitcoin permits, is like, if that were to be imposed and people disagreed with it, then they would just put their capital into something like Bitcoin and make sure that the state can't get their hands on it. So I don't think that's a
I
viable.
mean, you'll always have people going outside the system, and I think that Bitcoin will allow for more of that, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Um, but I do think there will need to be a little bit of centralization for certain things, and how they acquire that. How do they acquire that? And I
By
think the
providing
only
valuable services, right? I mean, of
well,
course there's going to be some centralization,
yeah.
but coercion is probably going to be, again, over time.
So
This is going
how
to
do
take
you
some time.
decide how people pay, right? If
What
there
do you
if
mean?
it's if there's centralized services, I always give the example of roads. Let's say there's a certain amount of centralized services. How do people decide how much they're paying?
What do you mean? Like, if they're going to if they're going to join a
There's just
jurisdiction,
roads.
something like that?
There's roads in my city.
Yeah.
How
Well,
does
I
the
mean,
entities that make the roads get the money?
I guess it depends if they're pre-existing or if it's a new town or something like that. But I think the scenario that will prevail in the future will be that people will be far more mobile, right? And so as a result, they'll be able to, pick up sticks and settle in the jurisdiction that treats them best. I mean, we're seeing a version of that now with digital nomadism and people living in different places. And I think they'll make those decisions, and those jurisdictions will maybe have some sort of flat fee for people that want to domicile in them, or maybe they'll have, a more specific, fee structure for different services and things like that. So
Well,
I think
that's
there'll
what I'm
be,
talking about is the fee structure.
yeah, yeah.
So
So,
so it,
so
so so in my head though, in my head, the only two fees that make sense is like I say, an estate tax because that person has lived their life, they have some capital left over. I think a portion of that could be, but there will be other models, and that's okay. The other one that I think is reasonable is some form of like a luxury sales tax, where like basically if you're consuming far more than what you need as an individual, then maybe some of that, if you're buying a yacht, maybe you can actually afford to give a little more to your community than the average person. And then things like food and everything else would have little to no tax whatsoever. So I think, I thought those were probably the only two reasonable forms of taxes. One of my buddies challenged me and said, well, maybe a bit of property tax makes sense only because, again, with the roads, you want the area around your property to be somewhat maintained. And maybe, you might have based on how much, just to maintain the area around the area that you own, maybe a little bit there is, I don't know. But I do think that the regulation, the taxation, everything will need to be a fraction of what it is today. And there will be different models, absolutely, and we might disagree on those models. And I think
Yeah.
that will be a lot of discovery, because one of the things I heard recently, I think it makes a lot of sense. Like, there is a risk going to Bitcoin because we don't know what it will look like because we've never had it yet. But all we know now is that the system is broken. So it's far less risk than continuing on the path that we're on right now.
Well,
Because
I totally
we
agree
know
with you
where this
there.
path leads. We've seen it before.
Yeah, and I think you're right. We will see many different models because people that want to maximize, let's say, that the possibilities that Bitcoin permits for privacy and for you know for making their capital basically off limits to anybody who any involuntary sort of encroachments on it, then those places will emerge where those people are catered to, and other people who don't have those considerations, or who aren't as offended by certain taxation regimes, then they'll stay within certain jurisdictions. So I mean, what we're talking about here is probably going to play out will continue playing out, right, over hundreds of years. And
Yes.
so we'll see how it goes. But I think
Yeah,
it's
and
interesting
I
now
mean,
that there's a tool that exists that allows for the maximization of a person's ability to say no to that taxation, no to whatever is going to be imposed on them, and then they have the capacity to leave and find a place where they're
absolutely.
where the laws are
And
more
and
appealing to
maybe
them,
this is a
more
little bit of a
acceptable.
transition into sovereign craft. Um, Full disclaimer: there will be a sales tax in sovereign craft. but again, like, it's really interesting because when you have a digital monetary medium, uh, it allows for things that we haven't been able to do before. So with all of these ideas, ultimately, I fully realize that, and as much as this sounds like a Ponzi, it absolutely is not. But I fully realize that the only way for Bitcoin to be what it could be is for all the plebs, all the people who are maximalists, to tell one person at a time. This is going to happen bottom up, which is perfect. It should happen bottom up. If it happens top down, the distribution will be far less appropriate. So I do see this bottom up approach of, Bitcoin getting into the hands of people who need it most, and slowly making its way up from the bottom, from the plebs up to the top. And like, in some ways, it's really interesting because you look at the game theory aspect, and I mean, the United States could print $1 trillion tomorrow if they wanted to, which is far more than the market cap of Bitcoin. So in some ways, it's not really a threat to them yet, but it kind of is. And it's interesting how it's all playing out. But what I realized here, in as it continues to be adopted, when someone goes maxi, they generally don't go back. I'm at a point now where any new savings that I have will go directly into Bitcoin and nothing else, and it will continue to do that. So if we can get more people to think the same way, and the whole idea of hodl never sell, basically, until it actually can be used as money, then that's the way that Bitcoin allows for all of the promises of low time preference, which extends far beyond just money. It extends on to society, extends on to how people think about their lives. I truly do believe that unsound money is the root of all evil. So from there, it's how do we orange pill more people? And with me, with my kids, with Minecraft, and being a systems administrator, I was realizing that more and more, as everyone can be their own bank, you're going to see really interesting things happen. The company I currently work for can do upwards of, let's say, $10 million in sales in a weekend. About half of that tends to be credit cards, so about 5 million. You take about 1% of that 5 million, and you've got $50,000. Well, if they can save the credit card fees of $50,000 per weekend, there's going to be a very high desire for them to self custody and have a lightning node so that they're not relying on anyone else. And we're going to see this more and more, is that businesses especially will run lightning nodes. We will see that employers will run, those same businesses will probably offer the ability to receive your paycheck in their own Lightning node. And if you want to transfer the money out, you can. And if not, they just keep it there in their node. So it's going to get really different. The idea of a bank account when everyone can be their own bank is going to appear very, very different in some ways.
Totally.
So
Before you go on, just
yeah.
a final question on what we were talking about. And it's obviously I agree, but I'd just like to get your more specifics on it. What do you mean when you say unsound money is the root of all evil? Why do you believe that?
Well, there is the expression of money is the root of all evil.
Right.
And especially with the Bitcoin standard, whenever I was reading about time preference.
Is it, sorry to interrupt, is it money or is it the love of money is the root of all evil? I think sometimes it gets
It's
butchered,
probably
but I
the
think,
love of, yeah,
yeah.
whichever. For the purposes of this conversation, that's not overly important. But the way I see the world going is we're going towards a more and more high time preference society. You look at kids today; they're addicted to the dopamine that's released every time they go on their electronic device, their phone. You know, we have people who, you know, Safety in his book um, talks about how a lion only cares about its next meal, where a bird has a lower time preference because it will build a nest for its young. And we should have the lowest time preferences as humans. But what are we doing? We're actually consuming before we even put in the work. We're worse than the lion in many ways. And, you know, with credit. So you look at the way that causes disordered thought. People are not willing today, in my opinion, to put in the effort before they receive their reward. And that makes us little more than animals. What differentiates us from animals? I mean, I'm also a man of faith. I won't get into that. But you know, like our cognition, our ability to hopefully be able to override some of our tendencies. Like, why is fasting a good thing? Fasting is a good thing because it orders yourself to overcome your natural desires, which makes us more human. That consciousness, that ability to deny oneself on purpose for the good of tomorrow. I have 5 children, right? Like I got to think about their futures. I got to think about many things. And when the actual medium of exchange, we are social beings, when that medium of exchange is raised to an extremely high time preference, I believe that it devolves humanity to little more than that of animals. And Bitcoin's lowered time preference because it has the ability to store value. And as human productivity increases, it will actually take less and less hours to receive the same amounts of goods and services through technology and innovation. It does throw the idea of high time preference on its head, where everything becomes low time preference, because the more we can put off today, the more we can have tomorrow. And that makes all of us better people.
Yep, agree.
So sovereign craft. I'm gonna try and get to sovereign craft here. We've been going pretty good, but I don't know what the limits are. But
no limits.
Anyways, with sovereign craft, the idea there was, you know, my kids were playing on some Minecraft servers. I was on some Minecraft servers, and Minecraft is a game that, in addition to being like Lego and like a little bit of physics, like what I say, it's also very open. It's designed in Java, and people can make their own plugins. It's encouraged for people to make their own plugins, and people have added onto this game. And some of these servers have an economy plugin, and you basically have funny money in the game. Maybe you go to someone's website who operates a server. That's how they make their money. You pay them $4. You get a whole bunch of items or some in-game money that you can transact with. And people have different forms of money. Some people just use the diamonds in the game as the form of money. Some people use a dollar value. And with the things I was learning about Lightning, I was like, well, why not have Bitcoin inside a video game? We do have other cryptocurrencies, which, again, as I said earlier, distract from Bitcoin and delay its adoption. And with how important I see Bitcoin being, I think that we need more examples in the gaming space of Bitcoin, not crypto, as a unit of account. I think that sats should be the only unit of account. Video game, real life, I don't care where it is. we got a unit of value that's programmable, and there's no reason why that unit should not persist across everything. So, um, so yeah, my idea was, well, how reasonable is it to tie satoshis into Minecraft as the unit of account? So if a person is playing Minecraft and they're just into architecture, they just want to build an amazing home in Minecraft. Maybe they pay some kid who is down in the mines of Minecraft getting diamonds and getting iron and getting whatever else this person needs, and they can pay them a buck or two, so that they can build their creation and interact online, and kind of creates a little bit of a dynamic economy. And people are already spending money in Minecraft, but it's kind of clunky because you use your currency of your money, and you credit cards in there and everything else, which is hard for children, especially. They don't have credit cards, so they got to bug their parents for money and and whatever else to get these in-game, items, because they don't want to spend 5 hours mining for iron or whatever else it might be. And there's parts of the world that make very little money, and Bitcoin is the great equalizer. There's parts of the world that people are making 10, 20, $30 a month. If they can find themselves an old machine, and Minecraft is a very easy to run. I'm actually running this avatar right now from a built-in Intel graphics card. It doesn't take too much horsepower. Starlink's coming into the scene. All these things are creating more accessibility. And for someone, I am in North America, like for someone in Canada, United States, or whatever, to pay $1 to someone who spent a few hours doing something in Minecraft, or maybe they'll even pay them to build their house. Who knows? Like all of these things are possible, and it's a great equalizer. So, with my children, they have Bitcoin wallets, and there are ways that you get free satoshis. Bitcoin Rocks is an excellent way. They have stickers that if you kind of do a little bit of guerrilla marketing and put up their Bitcoin doesn't have inflation stickers, you get 21,000 sats per sticker that you post up. Um, there's things like Carrot app, which allows you to read Bitcoin articles and get 5 sats per article. And then in game, you can then, because you're safe, everything in the game will have real value. So let's say you teleport in game. Well, that saves you time of otherwise walking. Well, maybe that costs you 5 or 10 sats in game,
Mm-hmm.
which helps fund the server. But all the person has to do is read a quick Bitcoin article. So now it's encouraging education to then get your sats that you can then transfer into the game, into your in-game Lightning wallet, and then use that value in game to perform different tasks. I intend on Sovereign Craft being a very big educational platform. So on these servers, you usually start in something called a lobby, where you can join multiple different worlds with different properties. And in this lobby, I'm going to put a lot of content in there where we'll have links to the Bitcoin standard. We'll have, you know, um, a whole area that shows people, you might go into a house and there'll be one house will be like get free sats, and you go inside this house and you're interacting in this digital world, and you're clicking on links which bring you to the apps that give you your free sats. And it just creates a little bit more of a dynamic way to interact with the in-game chat and walking around. And I'm hoping that we'll get, more and more plebs in there, even if they don't have an interest in Minecraft, to develop more content and just get things going. You can even put books right into Minecraft. So for people in countries that don't have access to certain things, or certain things are restricted, there's actually a Minecraft server out there that is done by Reporters Without Borders, and it's an online library of restricted
Right. I've heard
materials.
about that.
Yes. So it's already out there and it's running, and they can't stop it. So then I start thinking of all these things. I'm like, it's really hard to stop a video game because it's not a direct threat, let's say. But if you can go into Sovereigncraft and read the Bitcoin standard right in Sovereigncraft, Save Dean has actually encouraged piracy of his book as long as it's the right version, because he just wants people to know about Bitcoin. So we can put some of these things in game, and 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 this has the ability to go anywhere. Like I even went as far as thinking, what if we did have the web portal like the other servers? What if we had it so that someone could buy in-game sovereign craft bucks, which just happens to be Satoshis. But people aren't buying Bitcoin. They're buying sovereign craft bucks. How much harder would that be for a government to legislate? How much
There you
harder would
go.
that be for, you know?
Now
So
you're
it's like,
talking.
oh, no, they're not buying Bitcoin. You know, that person in India, no, they bought sovereign craft bucks. Oh, they can transfer that sovereign craft bucks out into Bitcoin, but I'm not going to police that. That's up to the government. Oh, is the government going to join my server to figure out? I don't know. But, you know, I think that blurring the lines that
Mm,
much more will cause a healthy amount of confusion. Because when does value become a cryptocurrency or Bitcoin? When does value, by the definition of government, become illegal? And I think the things that they're trying to do from a fundamental perspective does not make sense. And I think that Bitcoin can, sovereign craft can assist in this. You know, it can be one of those challengers. It can be one of those things where it's like, you can go on here, you can educate, you can interact, you can play, you can transact, and nothing can stop that.
yeah.
So what do we have so far? So currently it is just me making this. I have no team. I am a pleb and I am not rich. I would love people to get involved. They can reach out to me on Twitter. I need a website. I need, you know, I need people who love Minecraft and will go in game and help create content. I want this to be a community of people all contributing. And it is happening already now in game. Someone can join the lobby, let's say, their Lightning account automatically gets created. They automatically get 100 sats put into that wallet. And if they do slash web wallet in the game as a command in the chat, they'll get a link to their wallet that they can generate an invoice to withdraw or deposit. All of that is working. We don't have yet all the things put into the game so that people can transact in game. Like let's say an auction house plugin, all those things are coming, but it's happening fast. You know, I personally did not know Java 4 months ago, and you know, we already have you know a server that's fully integrated now with Bitcoin Lightning and a wallet that works. So I'm not stopping, and I
This
think
might be a
it could be
stupid
big.
question, but are there ways for these servers to be, because, you know, again, the choke point, one, I think it's awesome, right? And I think, you know, a lot is made of this notion of Bitcoin bringing cost to, you know, the digital realm, and therefore kind of making it more real. And then, of course, as you say, like people can come in and they can interact in these spaces anonymously, whether you're a journalist or whomever, and you can transact
Absolutely.
anonymously, and nobody, you know, nobody's the wiser, and it's just impossible to regulate that stuff. Part of the choke point is, you know, who's the server, who's providing, you know, the initial liquidity, who's managing the wallet balances, who, you know,
Yeah.
where is the server
So
instance located, and so is that able to be obfuscated sufficiently so that, you know, there's genuine total
not
anonymity
entirely,
here?
no. So right now, actually, if you were to go onto like mempool.space and um, go to the beta Lightning map, and you were to look at a little place called Calgary, Alberta, Canada, you will see a Lightning node called Sovereign Craft. So no, it cannot be completely obfuscated because there's a few reasons for that. Number one, the Tor network is very slow for Lightning.
Mm, mm.
It's great for an individual who really wants to transact anonymously. It's great for that. But for actually operating the Lightning network, it needs to be on ClearNet. Otherwise, you get far too much latency. You know, we don't want seconds of delay whenever you're transacting in a store. And if every Lightning node was on Tor, it would take many, many seconds just to hop from node to node to get to its destination.
Yeah.
So, so no, Lightning nodes, when they are custodial, um, do have a certain amount of exposure there. The server as well right now is hosted not in a cloud. So yeah, you can see that same IP address. The Lightning node is local to the server, and it will remain as such for its own security. because I am doing direct calls to that node, so that when you're in game, those transactions don't leave the node, which means every transaction in game is 100% free of fees, which is important because these are going to be a lot of microtransactions. If you're teleporting and I'm only charging 10 sats for a teleport, well, I don't want, one of those sats to end up being burned at some provider. There will be a disclaimer on the server that this is not intended to be a custodial Lightning service yet. That might be in the future. As of right now, there will be no insurance for lost funds, which is no worse than any other server. Other servers, if you pay $4 for some in-game features and that server goes away the next day, you have no recourse. So this is the added ability to withdraw. We're going to start with a relatively low liquidity, but that node is public, so people can go, and I will have links to show what the balance is on that node. And then based on the balance and how many players people can do, I might put something in there that will tabulate all of the player balances and just put like a lump sum so that people can compare the lump sum of all player balances to the actual liquidity on the Lightning node. I do want transparency, absolutely. At the same time, one step at a time. If this becomes such that people are using it as a bridge to get into Bitcoin, although I don't recommend that, there will need to be more liquidity, obviously, and there will be more balances going through there in larger amounts. But ultimately, not your keys, not your coins.
Yeah.
And I would hope that that people do not intend to use a video game as their primary bank account. It is really cool though that a person could have items for sale in Sovereign Craft. They can sync that wallet to Blue Wallet or Zeus. They can go out to a store that accepts Bitcoin and buy a coffee 3 seconds after they sell some diamonds in game when they're not even logged into the game.
Yeah.
That is really cool.
It's super. I mean, that's what I was going to ask you next. It's like, I don't think people appreciate just what kind of a weird change that's going to be, like even, I don't know, like whatever game it is, Mario and you eat the mushroom, or GTA and you kill the bad guy, whatever it is. And like money pops up. And instead of that just being relative, like pointless money, it's, you can get a better gun in the game, or powered up, or an extra life. It's actual real world money. And we all have to appreciate, and most people don't, that there is no greater incentive than, dominant money in the world, which Bitcoin is obviously aspiring to become. And so that means like, how much more engaging do these games become? How much more time do people spend in them? And there's pros and cons to that. How much more development gets put into them, how much more possibilities are built into them when the unit of account in these things is not only transferable between them all, but transferable in and out of the so-called digital realms to be used in meat space world, where it is, again, the dominant incentive that there is. I mean, I think it's a way underappreciated shift.
Like it's wild. My 11-year-old child is pretty orange pilled, and she has a lot of friends who play Minecraft, but they don't understand Bitcoin. And she's telling them that her dad is making, a Minecraft server that will have Bitcoin integration. They're really excited about it. And this is just one school. There's just one person in one school telling a few friends about it. And they're like, wow, that sounds so, and they don't even have Bitcoin wallets, and they won't need them. The moment you join the game with absolutely no interaction, you join this server, and the second you join it, you have a Bitcoin wallet. And if you go /web wallet, you can use that in a browser. That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's zero barrier to entry. It's not even downloading an app. It's just, you're already playing Minecraft, join this server. Whoop, you're in Bitcoin. You have 100 sats. You are officially in the Bitcoin network. And that's incredible. And I think we will see this more and more. And because Lightning is not blockchain, it allows for developers to build on top of it very easily, because it's a bank, ultimately. So how much do you trust your bank, right? Like, and I will have documentation saying what security I'm taking. Right now, I will say my Lightning node is not encrypted at rest. I want it encrypted at rest, and it will be soon. But as I develop, so as it grows and as the features, get larger, there will be a lot of transparency in exactly what we do to ensure that keys are safe, ensure that that there's encryption at rest. So if someone were to break into the facility where this is hosted, that they would get unintelligible information. I will still put those things in there
Sure.
for transparency purposes. But
Yeah.
ultimately,
For the
at this
amounts
point, it's
involved
not
right now,
intended.
people aren't going to be too concerned with. I mean, it's great that you're considering it already, and that, I think that's the way things should go. But at least right now, I'm sure the amounts people, kind of expect that, maybe you lose
Yeah,
the few thousand sats you accumulated in your wallet in the game. But the
which
broader
would be
picture,
crappy, but
yeah, sure. It's always a tragedy when you lose any amount of sats. But I mean, think of all the possibilities here. Like as you mentioned, people in a developing country of some kind, not only can they enter the digital economy, but now the digital economy is, it's when you're playing games, it's when you're on social media, it's when you're performing some sort of task in a digital environment, and you don't need ID, you don't need a bank account, you don't need credentials of any kind. You just enter the space, and there's basically sats up for grabs. And how do you get them? Is it because you're skilled in a game? Is it because you're skilled in some sort of task that someone needs done and they're paying sats for? Like, it's just the bridge between the two domains, and then the explosion of opportunity, and the dramatic minimization of friction between it all. I mean, again, I don't think we can really comprehend the kind of effects this is going to have. We're just scratching, kind of blindly at the surface as this thing is just beginning to develop. But it's such a paradigm
and it's
shift.
about getting the kids on, right? Like if we can get the kids in
It's always
on
about
Bitcoin.
getting the kids, get the kids
Well,
hooked.
well, seriously, right?
Oh, I'm
Like
serious too. Like, what do you think
how do we
McDonald's
get?
policy was? And it's always like,
Yeah, yeah,
get them while they're young.
yeah, and ultimately, Bitcoin will benefit the future generation more so than ours.
Hmm.
So I can. I mean, I can show you a very rough idea here of what we're
Sure,
looking at.
sure.
I was not planning to do this, but hey, let's be a little
Let's
bit
roll with it.
rebellious. Can I share my screen? Share screen. Ah, you disabled that. So no, I can't.
Oh, let me see if I can undisable that. May might not be able to do that while.
That's okay. But yeah, ultimately, there's not much there yet either way. Technically, the server's online. Technically, people could find it if they're if they're ambitious, but there's not much to it. But the beginning is there, the bridge is there, and honestly, all the stuff that is unique to this server is already done. So now it's just about building a Minecraft server. I want Minecraft people. I want, Bitcoin people. I want people in game to just start building out content. Like, yeah, like if
You should.
someone is an architect and wants to build a cool looking home, I can import that.
Yeah,
So let's start getting it going to create an attractive environment for people to interact.
totally.
Um,
You should be able to share the screen now if you want to give it one more
I'll have to
whirl.
try and I'll have to try and reload the game here. Let's see if I can get that going. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's going to be a good example of what can be done. I don't think that I think every multiplayer game that has any type of in-game economy should be Satoshi based. There's no
Totally.
reason not to at this point.
Yeah. And again, how
So
much does that change gaming in general? I think it's a huge change. Like all those internal gaming economies that were basically only relevant to, well, themselves, self-referential, or now are relevant across all games and across all you know, across everywhere where transactions take place in the digital realm and outside of it. It's remarkable.
And the frustrating thing is everyone's making these gaming tokens. And it's like,
Right.
why do you need a gaming token? Like if you have a layer 2 non-blockchain based unit of account, that's all you need.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like all of these other currencies just detract from yeah, from
Amen.
how
But
it should be.
I think there's well, a lot of people haven't reached that conclusion yet. And then of course there's the huge incentive of launching your own token, and you know, the value, you know, how you can enrich yourself by doing that. And that's definitely the motivation a lot of the time too. All right. Play
Here's the
multiplayer.
humble beginnings here.
Humble beginnings.
If I don't get any errors. That'd be hilarious if I just crashed out. But I mean, this is like pre-alpha. So, in addition, my webcam combined with my game, because I have a crummy computer, it's going to be quite slow. Very slow. Look at this. I can't even render. Wonderful. See this? It'll come in. This is my computer. There we go. There we go. Here we go. So here I am in game, right? If I go /balance, it will say here that I have 100 satoshis. There it is. The text is ugly. I gotta clean everything up. You know, we're just getting started.
Sure.
But you know, so there we have 100 sats. If I go /web wallet, it's going to pull up in the chat. Click here for your web wallet. We click there, sends me to a URL, and then that URL looks like this. Here's my Sovereign Craft web wallet. We can create an invoice. So if I want to put money into the game, I can just go unit. You can pick your currency, or you can keep it in satoshis. I want to put, let's say, 1,000 sats in here. I can put a memo or whatever, create invoice. The person now were to scan this with another Lightning wallet, they would transfer money into the game. That easy. You can scan as well if you're on the phone on this website. And then inside here, this is using LN bits, which is a great great tool that another developer has made for Lightning.
Mm-hmm.
But if we were to enable LND Hub, which is for Blue Wallet and Zeus, we could now, I'm not going to click this because it's going to show some sensitive information.
Right.
But you would be able to click LND Hub and then synchronize this wallet with the server, essentially. So actually, I'm thinking now I'm gonna have to delete this anyway because this is sensitive. the whole way that this is, as you saw, there was no username or password, so this actual URL is sensitive. Someone could get into this right now. Mm-hmm. So I'll just delete this afterwards. But anyways, in LND Hub, this is your read-only QR code. This is your read-write QR code. So if you were to then put this into Blue Wallet and just scan this, this would allow people to then interact with this wallet directly in Blue Wallet or Zeus. So that's the beginnings. You know, it's the full integration. From there, you'll have commands like send, but ultimately within the game, you'll be able to transact with others. So
I think it's awesome. Like I'm not a gamer at all, but again, I mean, I would be way more compelled to look at a game, whether it's, you know, Minecraft or any sort of other game, if I knew that satoshis were the in-game currency, if that's what I got for performing well or for, you know, killing the bad guys or whatever it is. Have you looked into what, you know, companies like Zebedee and some others in the space are doing in terms of
I have.
trying
and that's why I specifically
those?
mentioned these other tokens, because Zebedee does not work directly with Lightning. It gets into the world of shitcoinery very quickly.
Really?
And I just want something completely separated from that. Also, their platform is more complex than it needs to be.
How does it get into shitcoinery? I'm not familiar with it.
I didn't look into it much. I'll tell you the truth there. But very quickly, it got overly complex. And I believe that, I might be wrong on this, I believe that the unit of account is not Bitcoin. Didn't think so. But ultimately it was unrequired either way. Yeah, like they say here, powering real economies in virtual worlds. And I looked at it and I was like, yeah, I just don't think it's needed.
I thought their whole thing was bringing sats to games, basically. And
Hmm.
I don't want to be the, I don't want to misinform or whatever anyone. So let's take these assumptions with a grain
Yeah,
of salt.
we'd
Direct
definitely
people
have
to
to
do
take
their own
that
research.
off. Yes, absolutely. I did look at it quickly, but ultimately with what was already available in the Lightning ecosystem, and especially with LN bits, I just didn't see a need for it.
Right. You just do your
How,
own.
how are these guys making money? I don't know. Um, and it was just one extra layer that wasn't needed either way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ultimately, what I am looking to do over time, in addition to sovereign craft, is I see the need for all of these lightning banks to be part of our world, and I do think that getting to be a developer in the lightning ecosystem will be very, very it'll be an advantageous career choice, put it that way.
Totally.
Because everyone's gonna want to be their own bank.
Hmm.
And when that starts to happen, Lightning development will be huge.
So
Um,
are you hoping that this project turns into, a going concern as a business, and you can devote increasingly more of your time to it? Or
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I would ideally like it to be profitable to a point of me being able to do this full time. Um, I, I don't know how much it's going to be a live economy. How much sales tax will people tolerate? How much? And I'm gonna try. Probably gonna put in a 5% transaction fee if you're using any of the in-game features, like let's say uh, like an auction house, and that will go towards helping fund the server and my time. Um, and that might go up or down or whatever. Like if I'm just gonna try and be reasonable with it. But
yeah.
ultimately, I'm hopeful that over time, if this is a successful project, it will open doors. Um, and this will be a growing thing that
Yeah.
will be able to challenge people in many different ways. What eh, I have other ideas too. This is this is only one of them. There's specifically one idea that I'm not ready to make public yet that I think would be really attractive to people involving lightning as well.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's one
contrary
step
to
at a time.
our discussion, about taxation and stuff in the meat space world earlier on, I mean, I think one of the interesting, the nature of digital landscapes and doing things in this world is that, iteration happens far more quickly, and competition as a result is probably far more fierce, right? It's much more difficult to put moats
Yes,
around things. And, I obviously see that as a good thing, but it does mean that, well, you got to earn your keep, basically. You earn the stats
sure.
that you get,
And one other idea, and this is not this is not something that it's just something I'm considering. As I said, when you join into these Minecraft servers, you usually start off in a lobby, and that is done with certain aspect of these servers that allow you to essentially proxy your connection to multiple different servers. I have thought that if this gains traction, and one of the major barriers to entry is managing the node and having all the right things in place, and if Sovereign Craft does become a more trusted custodial account, then I could open this up to other Minecraft developers, and then Sovereign Craft will essentially not become the server that users are playing in, but more so the server that is the conduit or the hub to many other people's servers. So they can run a sats-based Minecraft economy very
mm,
easily, and it would just plug into my hub, and then I would take a very small fee in that case, and they would be able to manage their own economy and their own games. So there's lots of opportunity here where this could become almost like a hosting platform of
right,
sorts.
right. How do
Um,
you how do you think bringing sats into the gaming realm or into the digital world like this kind of seamless integration, how do you think, if at all, it will change kind of the nature of gaming? And I'll just give you some context on that question. Like, if it turns out that the integration with sats makes a particular game extremely popular. And it's kind of a feedback, right? Like, oh, more people are here, the game is more interesting, it's more compelling, therefore it's the, you know, the economy in the game becomes more robust, and that's a self-reinforcing feedback loop of bringing more people in, and that game being the one that people are drawn to because they can make the most money in it and it's the most entertaining and all that stuff. How do you think that extra layer of incentive will influence, you know, the gaming paradigm in terms of maybe concentrating more of the resources in the hands of fewer winners, or will it have the opposite effect? Or do you have any sort of insights in how you think that will pan out?
I think the sky's the limit, you know, like everything that can be done in a real world, if the game is more of a sandbox based game like Minecraft, can ultimately be done in the digital world. Max Crazier the other day put out a tweet, and I put a shameless plug that maybe he could donate to, to Sovereigncraft, but he said something to the effect of how he should hide 10 Bitcoin somewhere in El Salvador to promote, you know, like a scavenger hunt. And I was thinking, like, you could have a philanthropist go into the game, and we could have tickets in the game that give you sats, and you could hide these tickets throughout the digital world. And you know, people would have to find these tickets and redeem them for, so you know, you could have a scavenger hunt in the game. Why the heck not, right? For real money. You could have, and like, if two people want to transact in an anonymous way, they could both log into a server like this and interact with one another and establish a, God forbid I call it, a smart contract that has something built into the game. Um, you know, like the bridge between digital and real money creates the ability to create a bridge between the digital world and the real world.
Exactly.
And this is a tangible example of how these lines are going to become more and more blurred. Where that goes in the future, I mean, I'm perhaps not that creative
Who
to come
knows?
up with,
Yeah.
because it's wild.
It
Yeah,
makes me it makes me
game.
think of as I'm sure it does for many people, but you know, Ready Player One, where the basically
Yeah,
that's what's happened
yeah,
there. Now it's a bit more you know, the real world has descended into a kind of dystopian sort of place, which, you know,
sure,
maybe
sure.
the case, because when the possibilities and as we've been discussing, the possibilities and the opportunities in the digital realm are going to become so amplified. There's going to be an explosion, right? Like the, you know, what are the limits of the digital world? Basically the limits of your imagination ultimately. And once those become real, i.e. through the, you know, integration and infusion of Satoshi, a real world money that can cross those, you know, cross that divide, doesn't it seem reasonable to think that people are going to be so much more drawn, so much more incentivized to engage and spend time in those environments? And so what is that going to mean for the contrast between the digital environments where people spend time and the meat space or so-called real environments where people spend time? And I'm hopeful that it'll actually, you know, what's most valuable about the digital realm will be made apparent. And as a result, what's most valuable about meat space realm will be made apparent. But of course, you can go the other way and say meat space will be neglected and will become somewhat, you know, dystopian and gray in contrast or in comparison to what the digital realms are able to provide. And that might create a, well, somewhat of a schism, like in Ready Player One, where you have like the
Sure.
fantastical everything's possible world and the dystopian hyper controlled, you know, impoverished sort of meat space world. We shall
Yeah,
see.
and I think the one thing we really have going for us again comes back to time preference. I can't overstate how important I believe time preferences and how much, you know, we have people like Elon Musk talking about the woke mind virus. I don't want to get too political, but like I do believe that one area of uh, let's say like a method of thought can extend out to other areas. And again, like the exchange of goods and services is such a key part to humanity's evolution that I really think the lowered time preference will make people connect in meat space much more. You know, I think there will still be video games, there'll still be people having fun, but when you're thinking longer term, I think there's a very natural tendency to not squander one's time quite so much and not think about the immediate gratification, think a little bit longer.
Hmm.
And I think that's what we'll have going for us. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, what's going to stop us from just staying on the dopamine drip, like a
Yeah.
Wall-E type future? If anyone's watched the movie Wall-E, my gosh, a whole bunch of people with almost no bones that are just surrounded by blubber and drinking out of a Slurpee cup and watching funny videos all day. Like, that's very high time preference activity.
Totally.
Um,
And that's why I think in my two hypothetical scenarios there, I lean towards the former, because I do think both for that reason and how it changes people's time preference, and as a result helps clarify value generally in people's minds. Like what is it that's most valuable? What is it that's most deserving of my attention and my resources? And I just feel like that clarity, that sort of lens, will be effective in both domains. And that's why I think, what's valuable and possible in the digital realm, or possible valuable about it, will be clarified, made more apparent, made, amplified, made more valuable. And the same will be true for meat space. We will have greater clarity on like what is really uniquely valuable about the meat space realm, and therefore what is deserving of our time and attention and resources there. And I think ideally that's how we get the best of both worlds. And we get the best of both worlds via this mechanism that changes our perception in that way, that clarifies value for us, that instills a lower time preference, and all the other things that we know Bitcoin does. And so, again, Bitcoin fixes this, and I'm hopeful that that's the way it's going to turn out. But like all things, the initial periods might be a little bit rocky, because it's all novel, right? And it's going to take some time for us to adjust to it and find the proper balance, between
yeah.
what emerges.
Well, yeah, and the simple things like how much sales tax is tolerated to support a gaming server. I don't know the answer to that question. It is novel. Everything's novel at this point. So, similar to the dare I say argument we had about how to maintain infrastructure in the real world. I don't know yet what's going to be tolerated in a world where the vast majority of capital is sovereign to the individual.
Yeah.
How is the tolerance for making sure things stay running? It's all interesting. It's all
Very.
new.
And I think, the punchline is Bitcoin allows you to have a form of capital that makes all exchange far more, if not completely, but far more consensual than it ever has been. And so then it's just a matter of, well, what do people value, and who's providing that value, and
Yeah.
how much do they value
And
it?
and it might even be like, for instance, in Minecraft, when you die, some servers allow a command /back, which allows you to get right back to where you were when you died, which usually allows you to get most of your items back. Well, now these items are going to have real value. Now, are people more tolerant to have a sales tax on every transaction that's low? Or are they more tolerant to have a very high fee for using something like /back?
Mm-hmm.
And, I think actually, the more I think about it, and partially only due to this discussion and where we went with it, again, this might be a little bit of a hint as to what this might look like in the real world going forward as well. What people tolerate in a digital game will probably be very similar to what people tolerate in the real world. And the more that we can bring in these economies that require a certain amount of centralization just to keep things running, how does that look? I don't know. Like in the real world, we have lots of differences in societies. We have, like just between Canada, where I am, and the United States, our healthcare system looks very different, and there are some advantages to each one. Without going too deep into it, and people will argue for each.
Yeah.
So
Well, I
so
think
this will in the decentralization of money, it's going to cause that same discovery to happen in many new areas that we've never had to consider before, because they could just inflate it and hide it.
totally. And to the point earlier about the capacity to iterate more quickly in the digital realms, that may be a means by which you can get greater clarity about what solutions to pursue, or what solutions to at least try out in meat space, because now that the digital realm has a similar cost, a cost that's, you know, akin to the cost in the real realm, like a real energetic cost to activity, then those iterations that you make in the digital realm are far more relevant to their, you know, their counterpart, let's say in meat space realm, not equivalent, of course, but
Yeah.
probably far more likely to be applicable in some capacity. And so that bodes well too, because you can, as you say, you can iterate on all this stuff. And I think part of maybe our initial disagreement and a distinction that will probably be made clear as these iterations happen is, what's the difference between a tax and a fee? Like a flat fee is a flat fee, a tax. And I'd say like a lot of people probably distinguish in, one is non-voluntary or non-consensual. And so there's, you know, basically two primary ones: the inflation tax, which most people don't really know about, and so it's not really consensual there. And then a direct tax, which people are kind of forced to acquiesce to because you don't really have much choice in how much you pay. And so if we are dealing with a money where it's far more difficult to extract it without that consensual agreement, then I think we'll there'll still be flat fees and there'll still be offerings that have that kind of structure, but they'll need the voluntary cooperation. They'll need that consensual aspect of the person, because they'll almost be impossible to extract or get otherwise. And so, you know, it will be interesting to see in both domains how that attribute or quality of this new money influences business models, governance models, to what degree it fosters or kind of disintegrates or disincentivizes centralization. I mean, all that stuff is now on the table. And that's what makes all this so exciting, is like, we're really going to make a lot of changes, most likely, to how we govern ourselves and how we transact with one another and how we ascribe, store, construe value in all sorts of different domains. And that's what makes this endlessly exciting, you know, like, and again, this conversation is a great example of how we're just scratching the surface. I mean, like, this whole 10 years from now, sats and gaming, I presume, will just be an obvious thing. Like, duh, like, of course that was going to happen. But here we are, just kind of right at the very beginning of it, and people don't even realize it yet. How can you not be excited about it?
To a video game character, you know, in real time. Like the world is changing so fast, you know, like the ability for a person to interact with a real-time digital avatar on quite literally a computer I paid $50 for at a yard sale. You know, it's unheard of. It's ridiculous. And yeah, I mean, what the future is going to hold is going to be.
And, you know, we're not set up for this currently, but I'm getting together with Lyle from Vita Live next week, and we'll be trying out his live streaming through Vita Live, and people will be able to send sats as we're live streaming the conversation. And of course, you can do that now with podcasting 2.0, and you can send sats while you're listening and boost sats, like, and all that is super novel. But again, it brings such an added richness to this whole, you know, digital transformation or information technology transformation that's been unfolding over the last, you know, 20 or 30 years. And, you know, where it takes us, I don't think we can see too many steps, you know, in front of us, because it's all so radically different.
Absolutely.
Well, Sovtoshi, any closing remarks or anything you wanted to say or cover before we shut it down?
No, I think it went everywhere we needed to go, and I think the future's bright. I think, you know, I think ultimately Bitcoin will win. I think that we will win one pleb at a time. You know, I think it's going to be just at a certain point, and people will learn. You know, like crypto was the necessary discovery in the creation of digital money. Like all of these alts or poo or whatever you want to call it, you know, all of these other ones were necessary because it's like you said, the rapid iteration, the rapid innovation. People need to figure out what does and doesn't work, and there will be dishonest actors. There will be people who take advantage of that. But ultimately, you know, at least as far as history is concerned, strong money wins.
Yeah. And oftentimes, you know, pain is the best teacher. You kind of have to touch the stove. You have to get a little wrecked to realize, what the truth of a matter is. And so I agree. I mean, all this was I think kind of inevitable, but I think it's great that it seems to be. I mean, I'm sure we still have lots of shitcoinery to muddle through, and there's probably gonna, I don't know what the next craze is going to be, but every day, as you say, more and more individuals, one by one, people are waking up to the real story here and the real significance and the real value, and that's how we win ultimately, just drip by drip until it's a flood,
Yeah.
basically.
And ultimately, as ironic as this sounds, but when the mainstream educational system, like when Bitcoin is so obvious that it actually begins being taught in a way that is not corrupt. Because at a certain point, if it continues the way it's going, you look at a place like El Salvador, they're educating their people correctly on Bitcoin.
So cool.
And when it gets to such a point where the mainstream educational system is educating properly, because why aren't we educated properly today? Because they need inflation, because of how the structure of the taxation system is. They rely more on inflation than tax. So they can't teach us about money right now. Because if they teach us about money, they lose their main form of funding. So there is a necessity there to keep things obfuscated, where with the Bitcoin standard, there won't be. Here in Canada, we have Pierre Poilievre, who is trying to be prime minister, and he's orange pilled. I know he is. If he's lying, then my gosh, he is the most corrupt person I can imagine, because all the things he's saying is right and in our language.
Yeah.
And I met with him one-on-one, and I had to wait a very long time because the lineup was many hours long. But I asked him one question, and I said, do you think that the population will be okay understanding that by the time you add up their income tax, their sales tax, their property tax, inflation, etc., we're probably darn near a 60 or 70% tax on the people. Now, if we go to something like a Bitcoin standard, do you think people will be okay with, just like for like, until we transition things properly? Do you think they'll be okay with being taxed at 70%? Do you think they'll be happy with that? And his response was, I don't want people to be happy. I want people to know the truth.
That's a great answer.
And I think that that's okay. You're already being taxed to death. If what we need to do to transition to Bitcoin is to increase all the taxes temporarily to cover for all the crap that they're doing today, before we, just to create the transparency, it's going to be no worse. Remove inflation, increase your taxes if you have to, just to have like for like today. Remove the big unknown variable and keep everything else running the way it is. And
well, that'll last such a short period of time, because people will then say, oh, Bitcoin helps me get out of this super tax shitty situation. I'm going to put all my money in Bitcoin.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, it's like, if the government needs funding, they're going to have to be transparent about that. And people are going to have to agree to the tax that they're not agreeing to today. Oh, you want to pay everyone's freaking bills for education? That's this much tax, right? When they can no longer just inflate and they have to justify every spend, and that becomes public, it's going to be and right now people aren't even looking into the Twitter files, it seems, very much. But, there is going to be a massive amount of information that has to be out there when we remove the ability for people to inflate their national currency. It will have to become transparent, and that's a good thing. People won't like it. People will be angry. There will be a phase of anger because the government cannot adjust to how they would optimally be configured with Bitcoin without some kind of unrest, especially in a more functional society. El Salvador was already a wreck, so you can almost just rip off the Band-Aid. In a society like the United States, like Canada, dare I even say possibly like UK, Germany, like there are Scandinavian countries especially because they're closer to socialist but actually quite functional. You take those kinds of countries where it's like you don't actually want to rock the boat too much because we're all living okay lives. So it's like to then all of a sudden cut over to something where everything becomes transparent. Wow, wow.
Yeah, that's why I don't I mean, again, it's going to play out many different ways in many different places, but I think that's why the one by one, each individual making choices for themselves and staying, moving, making all those decisions, because I think it'll be too hard for a government to make that decision like en masse.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
basically they're, as you said, I mean, so many societies and governments today are enormous and they provide all sorts of different, quote unquote services to their people, i.e. they have a massive bureaucracy and they
Yeah.
have massive
We all
obligations
know
and
how that's wrong, but
right. No, sure. But my point just is like, they're not
Yeah.
going to force austerity on themselves because they, that's disastrous for them. They, and when has a politician ever taken that route? And so I think they'll try to keep the game going as long as they can. And it's up to individuals to make choices for themselves that insulate themselves from the turbulence and then maximize their ability to store value, pursue what's meaningful to them, have the life they want and need for their families, et cetera, et cetera. And so, over the course of that playing out, we shall see, where the dust settles when it ultimately does. But it would be a stretch to think that governments would willingly not only reveal that degree of transparency that you just referred to, but again, the austerity that necessarily would come with that transparency placed on them, and then the social, reprisals they would get from all those people that don't really understand the benefit of whatever change they might be proposing. Because I'm excited by Polyev as well. I think he's a Bitcoiner, and I think he's well intended, and I think he's, as far as politicians go, I think he's a great candidate, but he's going to have to be very strategic and walk that line carefully to
You want
steward
people
this
angry,
sort of
but you
change.
don't want them too angry.
Yeah, exactly. And if you just, drop the central banking scam on everyone on day one and full disclosure on everything, people are going to freak the fuck out. So
Yeah.
so
Absolutely.
it'll be a delicate approach for many, I guess. But again, punchline being, this is an individual revolution, and individuals should take it upon themselves to maximize the benefits that this new tool and technology provides for them and their families. And, that's the best
Absolutely.
way to go about doing it all.
Absolutely. And, we'll all orange pill in our own way. I appreciate what you do. We all have our role to play in ushering in the best possible future of tomorrow.
100%. Amen to that. All right. So anyone listening, if they want to learn more or reach out or contribute in any way, Twitter handle is SOVTOSHI, correct?
That is correct. Yep. The webpage is dismal right now. So any web devs, maybe that will be the link that we'll give going forward. But at the moment, just hit me up on Twitter.
Awesome. All right, man. Well, look, I appreciate you making the time, and good luck in building everything. And we'll have to catch up again in the future and get an update.
Absolutely. Thanks for the talk.
All right, brother. Take care.